In this video you're going to learn about one of the most sought after qualities of boxing and combat sports in general, and that is punching power. How do we increase it? Is it genetic? Can we change it? Those are some of the questions that you'll learn throughout this video. This is not gonna be a 5 steps to increase punching power type of video. I have no 5 secret exercises that will make you the next Mike Tyson or the Deontay Wilder. This is a collection of scientific studies and I have summarized them to the best of my abilities. Now, power is already a complex area to study because you have all of those different subdivisions that affect power development. If you watch my previous video about explosive power, you understand. And when we get into punching power for that matter, it becomes even more complex because then the subdivisions of every factor that you see here, those have to be specific to the movement of boxing as well. For example, in boxing it's not all about power production, it's also the technique, the leverage, your weight transfer, all of those things. And this video will be a direct summary of my literal analysis that I made here in the University of Umeå in Sweden. It is based on scientific methodology and 79 scientific articles, and since the making of this video I have made some corrections and even added some additional scientific articles in addition to those that you see here, and those will be available in the description as well. Now, despite its name, punching power is not only about generating as much power as possible. That is a very important component, yes, but there is actually more to it. There is tons and tons of technical factors that you would be surprised. Those factors contribute to it as well, in fact for the largest part. It's easy for us to think that Mike Tyson were just a genetic freak. Yes, obviously he was a genetic freak, but trust me, he knew quite a few things about technique and leverage. Now, to really understand the importance of power, let's start with some basic physics. Now, I am far from a physicist, not even close, but a couple of 100 years ago, this guy named Sir Isaac Newton, as you may know, he came up, among other things, the second law of motion. And it basically means that the motion of an object, the acceleration that is, it's proportional to the forces that is applied to it. So, if you had a car that was to come at you for a low speed like 5 kilometers an hour and it were to hit you, the impact, it wouldn't be that great, even though the car is of such big mass. You would be unharmed probably. However, if the same car came at you at 100 kilometers an hour, you would be pulverized. So what does all of this tell us in boxing? If I were to simplify it without all of the scientific jargon, it's basically this. We need to use our whole body mass for starters when we punch, if we want to punch with power, through proper muscular coordination, which we'll go into later. And we also need to use that mass fast, because once again, mass and velocity will increase the impact. And obviously this is the reason that we see more knockout among heavyweight boxers. Not only are they relatively fast, considering that their weight class is so high, but they also pack a lot of mass behind their punches. Now obviously we're not all heavyweights, we're competing at a fixed weight class, some of us will be a lot lighter than that, so we can't rely on mass only, so we need to consider all of the other parameters as well. So Newton's law applies that if greater forces are applied, greater acceleration is expressed. Does this mean that all we have to do as a boxer to increase our punching power is to increase our force output, that is through strength training for example? Well, it's easy to think that, but it's actually not that simple. This is only partially correct. We'll go into that later. But first, let's begin by defining what power actually is. Now, if you're a long-time viewer of my videos, you probably already know what power is. If you don't know, I really recommend you to watch my previous video titled "What is Power?" But for those of you who are new, let's go with a simple explanation. Power is basically the work that you do divided by the time it took to express that work. It's really simple. Work divided by time. This can be further simplified into other subdivisions, but for the purpose of sports, the most common explanation is probably force times velocity. That is the force you produce and the time it takes to express that force. That is power. It's basically not only about how strong you are, but how fast you can express that strength. So in simplified terms, a powerful punch, it will not only pack a lot of strength and mass behind it, but it will also be delivered very fast. That will equal to a very powerful punch. And this is a little table I've made of all the components that we are going through in this video, all the components that I found out affects punching power in one way or another. We will go through them one by one. Now keep in mind, I have not included genetic factors in this video. I have only included those factors that you can change, that are within your control. Genetics is even too complex for me. I am only sticking to my area of competence, which is sports physiology and strength and conditioning. Now obviously the research on punching power is very scarce, but it has been studied in previous research. But my goal with this work is to provide a practical basis based on this previous research that athletes and coaches can take into consideration. Because I find that despite the studies that are available, they don't do an optimal job of providing you with a realistic framework that you can use for training your athletes or you yourself training your power. And this will be the goal of my video, to give you a new insight, so to speak, that you can use in a practical manner. Now, if you're a casual observer and you watch a boxing match on the TV or the internet, wherever you see those guys punching, you might think it's a very simple movement. But punching is actually very complex. It takes years and years of practice to perfect it. To deliver a powerful punch, every single body part and muscle groups in your body, they need to work as one unit. Remember Newton's law, you want to create as much mass as possible behind the punch, so you need to use everything, not only the arms, which is what casuals always believe. This is a classic Soviet study that shows the relative contribution of different body parts to the punching itself. And as you can see, there is slight correlation between the skill level of the boxer and the utilization of the legs. The leg is a very controversial body part to punching power. We see a punch, it's naturally to think it's just the arms and all of that, but the legs, your glutes, your lower body, those are the heaviest muscles in your body. You need to use them. There is a lot of mass behind them. You can also see that when they studied the self-proclaimed knockout artists, they used their legs better than the other styles of boxers. And this is consistent with many other studies as well made on boxers. Proper utilization of the legs, it contributes to punching power a lot. And this is one of the most neglected areas by new boxers. The ability to transfer forces from your lower body to your upper body is of high importance. So how do we improve this leg drive so that we can pack a more powerful punch? First and foremost, learn the proper biomechanics of a boxing punch, of shifting weights. The technique, that is. If you're in a quality boxing club, listen to your coach's instructions. They have done this for a lifetime. They know what they are talking about. And you can also implement exercises for leg strength and explosiveness, such as squat variations, plyometrics, ballistic training and all of that. Don't be scared by those terms. I'm going to explain all of them throughout this video. Now, just to make sure we're on the same page, I just want to explain to you those studies, how they measure the punching power, because you have to know that. The most popular method is probably piezoelectric force transducers, and basically a force is applied to a pushing layer, as you can see here. Then this force is converted into output and they calculate how high that force is. As simple as that. So now you've gotten a proper introduction of what power actually is and the most neglected area of punching power, which is proper biomechanics. Now let's go through each and every component that is specific to punching power and their corresponding training intervention. Our first component and training intervention is force production, otherwise known as slow velocity strength, or simply maximal strength training. So we know that power is a product of force times velocity, so our goal with correct strength training is force production. And this will emphasize the force portion of this equation. And obviously, if we are to increase force production, we have to do it in a manner that is specific to boxing. Like I have discussed in my previous video, strength and power, or force and power, or work and power, however you want to put it, those terms, they are often used interchangeably and a lot of miscommunication can occur. And just to make sure we are on the same page, I once again state that force production in this instance is the ability to overcome a force with no regards of doing it fast. In simple terms, strength is basically this. It is your ability to overcome resistance at a set time limit, like less emphasis on time, that is. While power, on the other hand, you want to produce strength as fast as you can. We'll go into that later. This study here showed that boxers with superior punching power showed that they perform better in various strength and power measurement tests compared to their lesser powerful boxing counterparts. And this to a certain extent might be enough evidence to tell us that strength and power training will affect punching power, of course, in one way or another. So how do we increase our force production or maximal strength for boxing? As a boxer, we have limited time, of course, due to our own sport. We can't be staying in the gym 6 hours a day, 7 times a week. So we need to prioritize compound strength exercises rather than isolated lifts. That is, we can't be doing a lot of bicep curls. Instead, we should do things that work multiple muscle groups simultaneously in a functional manner specific to our sport of boxing. And as you can see in the list here, those are the subdivisions of different categories of compound strength exercises. We have a squat variation, a push variation, a pull variation, and a deadlift variation. Squats, they will train your leg strength, your leg drive. Push variations, they will train your pushing strength, your upper body pushing strength. Pulling variations, they will train your upper body pulling strength to balance out that anterior push muscles. You need a balance. You can't be too much forward developed and you can't be too much backside developed. That is why you use pull training, to balance everything out and make this even athleticism. A deadlift variation, it trains the whole body. A lot of people like to argue, is the deadlift a leg exercise or is it a back exercise? Is it a pulling or pushing? The deadlift is everything. It trains your whole body, head to toe. More on that later. Now, when training for boxing, our priority is to choose those exercise variations that are specific to the movement and the muscle groups of boxing. We also need to choose the variations that we can perform with good biomechanics. For example, if you suck in the high bar back squat, for example, well, don't stick to that. Try the low bar the back squat. Maybe that works better for you. If you can't do a certain exercise, choose another variation within that category. Go back to the categories in the previous page and analyze them. Get a qualified coach that can teach you. Don't try to do this on your own if you're new. It's not worth the risk. Trust me on that. Now here comes a little popular issue that I sometimes try to avoid, but I am certain it will show up sooner or later in the comment sections, and I will try my absolute best not to give some generic politician's answer, although it inevitably may be like that. What is my opinion on the deadlift? This is a pretty complex issue that requires its own video because we can talk until tomorrow morning about this, but I get it. It looks cool, it's fun, and a lot of athletes have personal attachments to it. Anyhow, I will begin by saying this, and this has not always been my opinion. This is something that I've been emphasizing more and more as time goes on. When it comes to any compound exercise in the lifting room, like I said earlier, you should always strive to perfect your biomechanics, almost to the point of obsessiveness, especially when we're dealing with heavier intensities. And this is also my personal opinion, based on my career as an athlete, as a coach, and all of my observations that I have seen throughout my years when training myself and when training others. The deadlift, in my opinion, it has one of the highest margins of error out there, out of all the lifts. Those professional powerlifters and strongmen that you see in competition, pulling heavy weights, deadlifting 400 kilos and whatnot, they have thousands after thousands of hours of training. They have a professional regimen, professional diet, professional supervision, and all of that. What makes you think that you know this to the same extent as them? There is a reason you're not seeing the injured athletes on TV. It's because they didn't make it. They did it incorrectly for a long period of time and eventually their body broke. This is the point of technical perfection. It becomes even more evident here when you do the deadlift. And once again, we see an argument online as to whether the deadlift is a pushing movement or a pulling movement, whether it's lower body or upper. The deadlift emphasizes every inch of your body. And if you don't use every inch of your body appropriately on this exercise, then things can get very dangerous. Especially when we get to the heavier weights. If you do heavy deadlifts with not only improper biomechanics but also very heavy intensity, you will quadruple your chances of injury. And if you're feeling fine right now, trust me, with those energy leaks and imperfect forms, injury will definitely come. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So if you can perform a deadlift appropriately, you have access to professional supervision that can be productive. But in my humble opinion, majority of beginners will misjudge their technical proficiency, so Do I incorporate deadlifts for my boxers? It depends. Do they have the professional experience in it from before? Can they display pain-free movement and proper biomechanics after a reasonable amount of coaching? If so, I will incorporate this. But even then, I will use it sparingly. I will not allow every repetition to be a freaking war. It has to be smooth and pain-free. And for many, I will do trap bar deadlifts because it's easier to learn. But when I have limited time with my boxers, I usually skip it and just stick to the squat variations, a pull variation and a push variation, because they will train all the corresponding musculature specific to boxing enough. Besides, if I were to incorporate anything that resembles a lift from the ground for boxing, I would rather prioritize Olympic lift variations like the power clean. We'll go into this later, because I believe we get more out of that for boxing than we do in a heavy deadlift. With that being said, this is not an absolutist opinion. I definitely have athletes from other sports where after evaluation I almost always include deadlifts in their program. But now we're speaking of boxing and how much it rewards us in boxing. Anyways, I hope you did not fall asleep. Let's continue on with the video. Here's another issue that is a bit tricky. At what training intensity do you train to improve force production? Before we go into that, let's discuss the different systems that are used to determine the training intensity for a program. We have the percentage-based system and the RPE system. In the percentage-based system, you select the training load on a given day based on your 1 repetition maximum on the given lift. So let's say your 1 repetition maximum on the back squat is 200 kilograms, then one day it might be 3x3 on 90%, another day it might be 3x5 on 70%, it varies depending on the period. The RPE period is more intuitive, it's based on feeling, it's the subjective rating of the difficulty of a lift. For example, say you have planned a squat that day, then you would plan to execute the squat on a difficulty of 7 that day in a scale of 1 to 10. So 7 that day it might be 100 kilos, in another day it might be 140. You just respect it. You plan to do it on a 7 that day, RPE 7 then it's called. And it is also common to do a mixture of both methods, nothing is written in stone. And there exist other lesser popular methods as well, including the repetitions in reserve and the velocity-based training method. I'm not going to discuss them, you can look them up yourself if you wish to do that. And generally the following guidelines are recommended when it comes to strength development when you choose either one of those systems. For example, when you use the percentage system, you often use 1 to 5 reps at 70 to 90% of your 1 repetition maximum. And when you use the RPE system, you choose a difficulty of 7 to 9 with 1 to 5 repetitions as well. You can pause this picture and read it further if you want. But here comes a little complex issue. Before you decide to use any one of those systems, there are some vital questions that you need to ask yourself. If you choose the percentage-based system, you need to ask yourself, how accurate is your 1 repetition maximum to begin with? For example, maxing out on a given lift like a 1 repetition, it's a skill in itself. And as a boxer, you have probably not developed this skill, so it can be complex to have a reliable 1 repetition maximum. And this is why I stress the point of getting like a qualified coach in some way to do all of this work for you so you don't have to do it yourself and risk injury and miscalculations. Also, there is other ways to find out your 1 repetition maximum. For example, you can do a 5 repetition maximum which may be safer, and then you calculate your 1 repetition maximum based on different formulas that are available, like the Epley's formula on that. But that is for another video. Just ask yourself this question. And for the RPE system, ask yourself, how accurate is your judgment? Is your 7 actually a 7 in reality? You need to be humble here. For example, if you have planned a 7 on the back squat that day, a difficulty of 7, you can't do a 10 because that is a misjudgment. Those are 2 very vital questions you need to ask yourself. For the purpose of this video and simplicity, I will use the percentage-based system. And the accuracy of your strength level, I don't really know. This is up to you. Now, what about core training? First of all, I want to say this. Core training is not only abs. Core is the whole trunk area, like the glutes, the obliques, the frontal abs. This is the core. When someone tells you to tighten your core, work on your core, this is what they should tell you to work on as well. This whole area. For boxing, emphasis needs to be made on core stability and trunk rotation because this will enhance your ability to transfer forces from the lower body into the upper body before making contact with the opponent. So I would prioritize core stabilization exercises instead of just abs, the beach exercises, you know. You can look it up, core stabilization. Look it up. Now we know that strength training will enhance the force portion in the power equation. The rationale as to why strength training is important for explosive power is once again that strength increases the power as power is a product of force multiplied by velocity. In other words, if the athlete increases his or her 1 repetition maximum strength in a given lift, improvements in explosive power can follow. And this begs the question once again, is strength training all you have to do to increase your punching power? Not exactly. Because when actions are done in high velocity, like a boxing punch for example, slow velocity strength, it has limited ability to affect those high forces at a rapid shortening velocity. In simple words, a boxing punch happens so fast, so your strength level, like your maximal slow velocity strength, it can't produce forces in that short of a time. And this is exactly why we have to emphasize both force production and velocity production, which we're gonna go through later. I know what you're thinking, I know you wanna ask it. It's okay, go ahead. Does strength training slow you down? You hear this all the time. You have boxers who have their coach tell them, don't do strength training, it will make you stiff, it will make you slow, it will make you a turtle, whatnot. I will tell you this, if you only perform heavy lifting with slow lifting velocities, which is rarely the case, your velocity production will be negatively affected, yes. But once again, this is rarely the case. If you follow a serious program under the guidance of a serious coach that utilizes scientific methodology and good empirical experience, this will not be the case because they will only tell you to do heavy strength training periodically, and even when you do it, it is along with velocity training, explosive training, plyometrics, all of those. Then you will get both force production and velocity production, and in that case, you will in fact be more athletic than ever. You will be faster and more powerful than ever. There is incorrect strength training and there is correct strength training. And now while we're at it, let's go over to the next point that is very popular. But what if I gain weight? I don't want to become too bulky. I have a weight class to compete in. I don't want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Ronnie Coleman. Don't worry about it. First of all, with carefully planned dietary habits, which I am sure you would do as a professional athlete, and training structure, this can be controlled to a large extent. Weight gain, a lot of it happens in the kitchen, what you shove into your mouth. And if you control this, then neural adaptations will remain the priority. That is, you will train the muscle fibers in your body to produce powerful movements rather than relying on raw muscle mass all the time. And if the goal is strength development only, intensity will actually be prioritized over volume. Training for the purpose of strength is different from bodybuilding. For example, for strength training, you keep the repetitions low and the weight high. So the priority will be once again neural adaptation. You train your body to be strong, like your brain to recruit a lot of motor neurons to produce powerful movements rather than just doing this grindy type of strength training like the volume training that bodybuilders do to create time under tension and build muscle mass. This is not what we do for boxing. And finally, remember that even if you were to gain muscle mass, muscle size is more desirable than fat in boxing because muscle mass is fat-free mass. It is accompanied by strength potential, and this increases your power relative to your body weight. Very well, enough of strength training. I'm pretty sure you're tired of that. Let's go over to our next component, and that is velocity production. The force production that we went through earlier, it prioritizes the force in the equation, but velocity, well, it prioritizes velocity. And there are different titles and definitions of velocity production. We have rate of force development, RFD that is, and we have speed training. But basically the definition is this. It is your ability to produce rapid muscular actions in conditions with minimal to no external resistance. Speed is the absolute priority here. And studies have shown that once athletes have developed an adequate strength base, they tend to be very responsive to velocity training. So in a periodized program, which we'll go into later, the rational thing would be to start with strength training and then go to a speed and power training intervention. We'll go into that later. Now, the contraction of a boxing strike, or any strike for that matter, happens very briefly. In experienced professional boxers, it can happen anywhere under 300 milliseconds, and that is a very short amount of time. However, studies have shown that it generally takes over 300 milliseconds for maximal forces to be generated. And this is an issue, of course, so we have to narrow this gap by implementing velocity training so that we can produce powerful, strong forces in a shorter amount of time. Once again, to achieve the highest possible power, the muscle must produce the highest amount of force in the shortest amount of time. And this can partly explain the ineffectiveness when we only perform heavy resistance training alone, heavy strength training for the purpose of explosive power development. Force production alone is not adequate, it's not enough. So we need speed training in addition to that, velocity training. When we have trained strength training and then we do velocity training, the same amount of force that previously took longer time to express will be produced in a shorter time frame, and therefore we have increased power production. Let's go back to the force velocity curve again. It is very useful. I cannot tell you how many times I've used it throughout my whole videos. Anyways, when you do strength training, the velocity of the movement will be inevitably low, of course, because the resistance is high. Therefore, you will target the upper part of the force velocity curve. In contrast to that, when you do very fast movements with little to no resistance, velocity training that is, that we're into now, you will target the lower part of the spectrum. And basically it all comes down to this when you're striving to train velocity production. Any movement, any action, any exercise that is done with little to no resistance and high mental effort and inevitably high velocity, this will train your velocity production, your speed in simple terms. It is a very neural type of training. It involves the brain. You have to teach your brain to think in terms of speed. I always tell my athletes, any fast action starts in the brain. It starts with a thought. You need to think in terms of speed and teach your brain to make fast movements, fast and powerful movements. It starts with a thought. The motor units that you recruit, they will travel through your spine, into your muscles, and they will produce this fast action. It's a very neural type of training. Okay, enough with the scientific jargon. Give me some practical examples. I know, I got you. Here are some examples of training interventions that you can do to train your speed or velocity production. We have plyometrics, ballistic training, Olympic weightlifting and sprinting. Those are most likely the most researched exercises, the most used exercises for both developing velocity production and peak power that we'll go into later as well. Some of them, they all have their pros and cons and they can all be used for different situations. Which is the most suitable for boxing? Now it could go over the pros and cons of each category for the whole day, but this would need a video of its own. But I will tell you this. Depending on the athlete that I coach, I will most often use a mixture of every method. Plyometrics, ballistic training and sprinting, they are very easy to apply, for example. Ballistics and plyos especially, they can be made in a sport-specific manner, which is a huge advantage. For example, the ballistic training, as you can see, we can do those medicine ball throws and work on that hip rotational power that is very specific to boxing, which often lacks in the other three methods that you can see. Olympic weightlifting is very technically demanding, so I only use that with people who learn very fast or have a history in it most of the times. Sprinting is very practical, plyometrics is for lower body power development, but you can pause this picture here and analyze it further and look them up further. We're not going to go into that too much, but those are very popular and often used methods for velocity production. And in this table you can see how different velocity training interventions will affect boxing specific movements. Now here are some priorities that I recommend you keep in mind whichever velocity training intervention you choose to do. Number 1, keep your rep range or the duration of the exercise low and have adequate rest periods. This is not a conditioning workout, this is all about quality. You need few repetitions, like 3 to 6 depending on the exercise, and you have to rest for minutes in order for your phosphocreatine system to recover again, your energy, your fastest system in your body. If you do this any longer, it's not power training anymore, it's not velocity training anymore. It will go over to cardio, because this system only lasts for so long and you need to emphasize this system with quality reps. Number 2 is that rotational actions are very frequent in boxing, so make sure to include some rotational exercises when you do velocity training. For example, the medicine ball punches, rotational throws, and you even have an exercise called the landmine punch. Those are very specific to boxing. And once again, this is a very neural type of training. Because the resistance is so low, we must ensure that high mental effort and maximal speed is put into those few repetitions, so on velocity-specific adaptation can occur, so that you can teach your brain to become fast and produce fast movements. Our third component is high velocity strength, and this is that sweet spot where you can utilize peak power. You see, if we lean too much towards velocity training, the power it will not be high, and if we lean too much towards force, the power will not be high either. So this is that perfect sweet spot of force and velocity, and the power production will be optimal and very high here. Some other words that describe this training intervention is peak power training or P-max training, power max training. It basically is your ability to produce peak power. Force and velocity training combined. The methodology will vary depending on which study you read, which book you read, but this is the main idea of it. And in the force velocity curve, as you can see, it will be somewhere here in the middle, of course. Now, just like velocity training that we talked about earlier, ballistic training and Olympic weightlifting are two very good and appropriate methods for high velocity strength or peak power development. The only difference here is that the intensity of it will be increased a little bit more until we get to that sweet spot of power. For velocity training, the priority is just raw speed. We just want to produce fast movement. It is the meters per second that the bar travels or whatever it is that you are doing. You just want to be fast, do fast movements. And for high velocity strength, we want to achieve that peak power. And once again, if you don't know the definition of power at this point, I recommend you go back a bit in the video or even watch my previous video to get a refresher. It's called What is Power? Now, I've been talking about ballistic training here and there a lot, and I understand some of you may not know what this exactly is, and that's what we're gonna go through now. Let's go through some exercises that are non-ballistic first, just to give you an idea. That would be the back squat and the bench press, for instance. You see, in those exercises, the acceleration is slowed down at the end of the range of motion. When you're doing a back squat or a bench press, you're often most powerful in the beginning to the middle, and then when you get to the end, you have to lock the weight out, of course, right? So inevitably you will slow down the movement, and often at the end you just lock out. So it's like a dead end, so to speak. In ballistic variations, however, you continue with the weight. Instead of doing a bench press, you do a bench press throw. Instead of doing a back squat, you do a back squat jump. The athlete does not break at the end here, therefore the acceleration continues. And some studies, they highlight problems with those non-ballistic variations because many sports, they require high velocity in the entire range of motion. And this is the supposed problem with them. However, I personally do a mixture of both methods. Basically it's this: ballistic training is any exercise that has that flight quality to it, that continuous quality. For example, if you throw a ball, that is a ballistic in nature. If you put some weight on your back and jump with it, that is ballistic in nature. It's basically anything of flight nature. So at what intensity do we achieve this peak power that we've been talking about all day long? Well, the literature is very conflicting. As of now, there is really no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to the exact intensity at which you achieve peak power. It depends on what exercise you are performing. Is it an Olympic lift variation, or is it a ballistic variation? Is it a jumping variation? How technically proficient are you in the exercise? You could have a gigantic energy leak, a technical fault that affects your execution, and that gives you unreliable data. And related to that previous point, do you have an accurate and reliable one repetition maximum? This is dependent on many factors. Are you proficient in giving it all you got? Are you technically proficient in the exercise like we talked about earlier? The factors, they are endless. But let's take a look at what the literature says based on the information we have available today. Let's take the bench press throw, for instance. This is a very common ballistic exercise. It's like a bench press, but you throw the weight so it continues in a flighty manner that we talked about earlier. And as you can see, the numbers, they differ. For instance, this first study, you can see that they achieved peak power at 50 to 60% of their one repetition maximum of the bench press, that is. And the second study, they achieved it at 30 to 45%. So that's a significant difference. But if we dive a little bit deeper, we can see that the test subject also differed. In this first study, test subjects, they were rugby league football players familiar with the exercise since before, and those are rugby players. This is a very athletic sport. They are probably familiar with all of those things, so this affects the data, of course, the reliability of the one repetition maximum. In the second study, however, It just stated exercise science students that have been weight training for their, quote, own conditioning purposes for a minimum of 6 months. Now, we don't really know what their background is. Like, they could be Zumba enthusiasts. We never know. So these are factors that you have to take into consideration when you read some of those studies, because they will affect the result. And here is a graph that gives us a general idea of the peak power depending on the category of exercise that is used. For example, in a jump squat, just jumping without any external weight produces the highest power. And when we do an Olympic lift variation like a power clean, we achieve peak power in 80% of one repetition maximum. And in a regular back squat, it's at 50%. So the nature of the exercise varies, will affect the peak power that you will achieve. You have to take the exercise into consideration. This is what this states. Now, once again, when we analyze data from studies like this, there is a lot of additional factors that we have to take into consideration. How much did the athletes exert themselves? For example, did the same athlete that performed the power clean at 80% exert himself as much as he did when he performed 60% or 50%? We will never know. So the only thing that is really within our capacity is to not get too caught up with finding the exact intensity you need for achieving this peak power. Just decide on an intensity that it feels good, and instead focus on exerting high mental effort on the repetitions. That will be the most productive thing you can do, I believe. Like, for me as a coach, I have to overanalyze things like this, but for you as an athlete, don't go into Mr. or Miss Scientist mode too much, because you have a sport to train for. Simplify it, but don't simplify it too much. Just think of it that way. Our fourth component is called the stretch shortening cycle, and this is your skill in utilizing elastic energy that is stored in the muscle, which allows you to use higher power, to achieve higher power. For example, imagine you wanna jump. As a natural instinct, you would bend your legs slightly and use this elasticity to get more power. It is like this spring-like mechanism that you have to learn to utilize better. You already have it naturally in you, but you can train yourself to better utilize it. And to utilize this stored energy in the muscle, you must change very briefly from an eccentric contraction to a concentric contraction. Basically a stretching to a shortening motion very fast, like this bending motion very fast, and you will use this stretch shortening cycle. Whether you're jumping, rotating your hips, extending your arms, your muscles have this elastic property that you can learn how to better use. So yeah, this stretch shortening cycle is not exclusive to jumping only. As I said, it is also applicable to punching and other similar movements as well. And to really appreciate the effect that this stretch shortening cycle gives us, this elastic energy, let's look at a study that explains the height difference between a jump squat and a counter movement jump. You see, in a jump squat, you just jump from a static position with bent knees, and therefore you don't use elastic energy. In a counter movement jump, however, you do a fast pre-stretch, like you bend your knees quickly, and therefore you use this elastic energy. And as you can see here in the data, the height is significantly higher in the counter movement jump, and that is because we could use the elastic energy here. And this same principle can be applied to a punch, to use elastic energy to improve the power output. You see, the mean height that those athletes lifted, this is a product of higher power output. So with this analogy, we can also use it to punching as well. Like, if you use this elastic energy in a boxing punch, any combat sport, any punch, you will gain more power. So how do we improve our stretch shortening cycle? Well, I would say the first step is to be aware of its existence. There is actually something called elastic energy in your musculature. Your muscles, like a rubber band, they are elastic. And any muscular action that involves an eccentric contraction followed by a concentric, that is a stretching and a shortening, they can utilize this. So you don't need an organized training session for this really. You can just use elastic energy in anything that you do. For example, a squat, a punch, plyometrics, anything of that stretching and shortening nature. You can use that as an opportunity to train your elastic energy as well. So next time you're doing any of those exercises, think of this elastic energy and focus on a quick transition to utilize this. This is all you need to really be aware of to train this component. And this transition, it must happen very quickly. Like when you bend down to jump, for example, you can't pause at the bending, otherwise you lose this elastic energy and the advantage of the stretch shortening cycle is nullified. It's about a quick transition, okay? Remember this, you need to transition quickly. For example, next time you're shadow boxing, this is a perfect opportunity to work on a stretch shortening cycle. Next time you're doing pads, the punching bag, twist the hips very briefly before releasing this punch, but don't over-exaggerate with the twist. Do it very briefly. When you're practicing combinations, for example, use the energy from the impact of the previous punch to transition into the next. For example, you do a jab, use the jab, the impact of the jab, and take your arms back fast and load the cross again. That is the elastic energy that we're talking about. Imagine that your punches are elastic like a whip. Trainers in the boxing world, they will often refer to this as the snap. I'm sure you have heard of that before. So you have to remove the habit of pushing with your punches. Use this elastic mindset. You need elasticity, that's it. But yeah, if you want some very specific exercises that are very elastic in nature, for the lower body, let's begin with the lower body. That would be the depth jump and the hurdle jumps. In the depth jump, you jump down from a box, for example, and immediately upon contact, you jump up again. And in hurdle jumps, you just put a bunch of hurdles together and you jump over them with both feet, and you spend as little time as you can on the ground and jump to the next. Bam, 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 like a bouncing ball. Remember, stretch shortening cycle is all about this fast transition. You want to use this elastic energy so that it doesn't go away and is wasted. So you have to spend little time on the ground and be like a bouncing ball. As for the upper body, when it comes to training the stretch shortening cycle, this is a very popular exercise that I use with my boxers. It's called the medicine ball punch. And there are quite a few variations you can do for the purpose of stretch shortening cycle and also velocity training, both condensed into one exercise. The first variation is to take a big step with the ball, and just upon landing on the ground with your front foot, use this elastic energy as you land with your foot and throw the ball on the wall as hard as you can. And it is very important that you take a big step and really plant your feet into the ground so that this elastic energy can be used. It is a special feeling to it. It's hard for me to explain in words. You just have to try it and get that elastic, snappy feeling of it. You'll probably understand sooner or later if you try this. The second variation is that you throw the ball on the wall, and as it bounces back to you, you throw it again immediately. Like you use the energy that it comes back to you and use that to throw it again. So it becomes like continuous repetitions in an elastic manner. You don't pause between the reps. And similar to that second variation, you can have a partner throw the ball to you, and as you catch it, you use that sort of inertia, or whatever you want to call it, you use that elastic energy that is built and you quickly throw it on the wall again. Those are the three elastic stretch shortening cycle variations you can do for the medicine ball punch. And our fifth component is called inter and intramuscular coordination and skill. And this is basically fancy vocabulary, just as you probably think about the other components we've talked about, but we have to use those terms because it's science we're talking about. I mean, come on. It basically means it's about the interaction between agonist and antagonist musculature. And you improve this by integrating technical training. It's about your movement proficiency. You have to use effective movement, and it's like an interaction between your muscles and brain. It's about explosive intentions. It's about good movements that allows for you to produce more power because your body is so efficient with the movement. I hope you're not like confused by everything I'm saying and it makes sense. But for example, for high power, there needs to be an optimal interaction between the agonist and the antagonistic musculature involved in the specific movement. For example, the bicep in this case in the arm is an antagonist, while the corresponding agonist will be the tricep. They are like the opposites of each other. When one is tense, the other one is relaxed. And to perform an action with fast velocity, the antagonist muscle needs to be relaxed. If the antagonist muscles are not relaxed, the movement will be slow. It will not be fast, and if we are not fast, we cannot produce high power. And simply put, you achieve this optimal interaction by technical training, efficient punching, like the proper weight transfer, the proper muscular relationship, your ability to relax and tighten at the right moment. There is no other way around it. You have to put in the hours to learn this. You can easily see the muscular coordination of a puncher that has done this for 10 years and one that is doing his first month of boxing. It is very evident. It is this relaxation and that it that they have. They just have it. That is what you need to strive to get. This is a study done that really showed how experience and punching force are related, and I attribute this a lot because these experienced boxers, they have better muscular coordination. They tested elite boxers, intermediate boxers, and novice boxers, as you can see, and the elite boxers, they produce significantly more power, as you can see in this picture, than their other counterparts. Yes, great, but look at this picture. Do you see the test subjects? What do you notice? The elite boxers, they are even lighter than their lesser experienced counterparts, but despite that, they still produce higher force. And related to this muscular coordination is the stiffening part when you punch. This is something that experienced boxers are utilizing better. You see, there exists a certain stiffening of musculature upon impact that creates an effective mass, as it is known as in physics, which leads to higher punching force, of course, and experienced boxers are better at using this. You can see in this graph that when an athlete, a boxer, prepares for a punch, the muscles, they stiffen to create a momentum. That might be like the hip twist you do before a hook, so your body has to stiffen up and prepare that. And then when you release the punch, the relaxation phase comes, like you relax your arm muscles until you just reach that last moment before impact, and then you stiffen. And this stiffening process, like it will increase it will create this effective mass that we talked about. So when you're punching, you do a quick hip rotation very briefly to not only use this elastic energy, but also to create momentum. And as you release the punch, you relax the muscles because this increases the speed of the punch. And just a moment before the impact, you tighten the musculature and almost stab into your opponent and create this stiffening, which increases the effective mass, which leads to higher force. This is about that double peak, that stiffening that we need as a powerful puncher. Now it's time for our last component, number 6, which I would like to call intention. And this is very, very detrimental to punching power or any form of power in general. And this is actually related to the previous point of intramuscular coordination, but to make it more clear, I choose to make it a separate field. And it is just all about this, performing actions with high mental effort to not only express higher power, but to also increase the training adaptation. You see, whether you're lifting, training velocity, training peak power, elastic energy, or any of the subcategory of power development, high mental effort is necessary because otherwise your adaptation will be insignificant. For instance, let's say you're going to do a back squat close to your maximal capacity, like close to 100% of your 1 repetition maximum. And because the weight is so heavy, you will be out of necessity forced to put forth high mental effort. Otherwise, you will fail the lift. In contrast to that, let's say you're going to train your peak power or your velocity, so you do some ballistic training like some medicine ball throws with a 3 kilograms ball. And because the weight is so light in this case, it is very common for the athlete to voluntarily put less mental effort into it, which will affect the training adaptation negatively. Don't do this mistake. Don't take it for granted that the weight or the resistance is light when you're doing, for example, power or velocity training. You still need to put this high mental effort into it so that you can adapt and your body can become fast and learn how to use powerful movements. Mental effort, it affects the training adaptation. The studies that I have provided here below, the 3 studies, they always compare 2 groups, a high mental effort group and a low mental effort group. And they both do the same exercises at the same intensity for a period of time, okay? But the only difference is that one puts forth more mental effort and the other lower mental effort. And consistent with those studies is that the high mental effort group's training adaptation is always higher than the low mental effort group, despite the same intensity being used. What does this actually tell us as athletes? It tells us that whichever training intervention we are doing specific to power development, we need to put mental effort into the exercise. Otherwise, once again, we will not achieve an optimal training adaptation. This is a mental game. You have to teach your brain to become fast, like I say in every video. Now, obviously, there might be exceptions to this rule. For instance, if you're doing a very isolated lift, like you isolate one muscle specifically, like you're training your lower back or your core musculature, it might be at sometimes dangerous to go too crazy with high velocity and mental effort in those exercises, because the purpose here is stability development, not power development per se. So these are the exceptions. So yeah, with higher mental effort and increased adaptation, we can assume that this will affect punching power, of course, as well. And sometimes you can dedicate like a very boxing specific power training session. For example, you do pads with very like short bursts of power, like you go all out with your punches to increase this power output. That is a very common method for training power punches. So now we have went through a lot of components to address, and I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. We have gone through a lot of technical terms, a lot of different training interventions, and how are we really going to find time to do them all? Well, don't panic, because first of all, you don't need a organized training session for each and every one of those components separately. A lot of them can actually be trained in the same session. For example, when it comes to the stretch shortening cycle, you just have to remind yourself about it regardless of what exercise you are doing. It only requires that shortening and lengthening quality for you to be able to emphasize this. If you're gonna do back squats one day, well, you can do some explosive exercises before that will train your peak power, your velocity production. All of this is known as a mixed method strategy, which is what I do with most of my athletes, especially in combat sports like boxing and wrestling, because they have a sport to train for. They don't have time to dedicate one training session for one component only. I don't really do that with any athlete regardless of the sport, because that is not time efficient and it's not productive. We can use a mixed method strategy. Many of those exercises, they are multidimensional. With the right execution, they can address several areas, like the depth jump, for example. It's not only about stretch shortening cycle, it can train your velocity as well, it can train your intention as well. Approach it like this. And we can set different priorities for one period based on the athlete's need. For example, let's say we have a boxer here who needs work on all areas of development. He's very unathletic. Then we can split like different chunks of emphasis in different periods. For example, the first period, our priority will be force production, heavy strength training to give this athlete a base of strength and prepare them for the up and coming power and velocity training. And this is of course best done in the off season when you have no competitions in the horizon. And then after that period we can transition into peak power training. We start prioritizing power exercises like ballistic training or Olympic lift variations if that is something they are proficient in. But despite this, we will still do the strength training during this period, but it will be a secondary priority. We will prioritize the speed and power movements, or the peak power movements rather. But we still want to maintain that strength. It is like a mixed method strategy here. And then in the third period, for example, we might want to emphasize velocity production a lot. We start prioritizing plyometrics, and while we're at it, we put extra emphasis on the elastic energy, for example. And this period is about becoming as fast and elastic as possible. But even during a periodization program like this, we never really do one training method exclusively. We still do a mixture of everything, but with different priorities. And this approach, as you can see here, is called periodization. All you need to know about periodization is that it basically means planning. You plan your training in a span of time. For example, you're preparing for a competition or a big event that is in the near future, like 2 months from now, 6 months from now, it doesn't matter. It basically means planning. And if you're an elite athlete, you need to familiarize yourself with this word, periodization, because you're gonna hear it everywhere. And while we are doing this periodizing, we can keep in mind that some components may be of greater importance than others at a given time. For instance, let's say this boxer was very strong, for example. Well, how much more athletic can we make him by only working on strength at that point? Let's say he's strong but he lacks in speed and peak power. Then it's better to prioritize those components instead. A lot of studies, they attempt to compare the effectiveness of different training interventions, like what is best? Is it strength training or velocity training? Is it light load or heavy load? Those are some of the comparisons they make, but it's not about that really. It depends on the athlete. The coach needs to take the athlete's weaknesses into consideration, and he needs to find out where the margin of improvement is the highest and give this boxer a unique approach, what they need, that is. Now, we have been through a lot in this video. I hope you learned something valuable from this, but there are 2 things I want you to remember before you decide to do anything. Number 1 is don't focus on things that are outside your control, like genetics. Focus on factors that you are capable of affecting, of changing. Yes, the field is unfair. Some people, they will be born with superior genes when it comes to strength or power and all of those things. It can be imbalanced, yes, but it does you no good to focus on that. Focus on what you are capable of changing. Number 2 is that you have to realize that your sport comes first. If you're a boxer, you cannot sacrifice valuable time dedicated to the art and skill of your sport just for developing power, because this approach will not prove productive. You'll learn in this video that muscular coordinations and technique affects power production a lot, so that needs to be a priority before you decide to emphasize power training. Thank you for watching.